My name's Elizabeth, and today I'm going to talk to you about education, because we should all care about that, right? So, Maya Angelou once said that when people show you who you are, then you believe them. While Miss Angelou was talking in terms of personal relationships, the same meaning still applies when we consider our professional image. So who we are is kind of predicated on what we do. And this means that people look to our actions to evaluate whether we are qualified for our jobs. So to enter a life of public service, then, you begin by making a commitment to serve the greater nation and provide resources we so greatly need. So the public naturally looks to the ways you distinguish your service in the past. And whether you want to be a governor, a senator, or even Secretary of Commerce, you are judged and deemed qualified based on the actions you do before you get into office, in addition to the service you perform for your community. It's a given that your life in office will continue to follow that same path we've established. But when our current Secretary of Education has no public service to show for in her past, then we are left to determine her agenda by the action she takes while in office today. Based off of this, I claim that the current Department of Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, will enact policies that will harm American education. So I will prove this by first showing how DeVos seems more intent on protecting business interests than the interest of her students. And lastly, I will describe how she is attempting to dismantle the very organization she is headed to run. So my first point is that Secretary DeVos is choosing private firms over students. As Secretary of Education, DeVos is tasked with looking out for the interests of students all over the nation. But it seems she's not taking this into consideration as of late, because right now she's requiring students who were defrauded by public colleges to pay back their student loans. So we would expect as students that if we were misinformed, lied to by a for-profit college that was just interested in getting up their numbers, getting a hold of our financial aid money, our student loan money, all of that fun stuff, that if we signed up under those false pretenses, that if the school shuts down because it was running illegally, then we no longer have to pay. But student loan collectors are coming after that money anyway. So according to the Los Angeles Times, this is how the Department of Education originally handled the situation. Quote, under the Obama administration, the Department of Education began to crack down on for-profit schools in 2014, restricting its access to federal student aid after concerns that the chain of colleges was falsifying the job placement rates of its graduates. But with the new head of the department's stance has changed recently. The article goes on to state, DeVos announced in December that she was breaking with this practice of fully wiping out the loans of defrauded for-profit students and would grant some of those students only partial relief. So DeVos is not keeping students' best interests in mind when she advocates for the collections of these debts. These students did not receive an education, yet they are treated as though they did, and that's why they have to pay back their money. In this way, Secretary DeVos is choosing loan collectors over students. And this points to her larger goal. My second point is that Secretary DeVos wants to dismantle the United States education system. Last month, DeVos had to submit a budget to Congress outlining what amounts her department would need in order to serve the nation's students, and she called for massive cuts. According to a Wall Street Journal article, Congress awarded the Department of Education a $2.6 billion boost when Mrs. DeVos had requested a $9 billion cut. She had sought to dismantle her agency's central budget office and to cut the number of field offices in the Civil Rights Division to 4 from 12. But the spending package included specific measures preventing her from doing so. So perhaps she never intended on receiving a budget cut that massive, that even if $1 billion was cut, it would make sense that she wasn't just eliminating redundant jobs, she was going after the services that we depend on. In a recent Vox article, they further explained that DeVos called to freeze Pell Grant awards for low-income students, and the federal work-study program, which Trump's administration proposed to cut in half, also got a funding boost. The omnibus also includes more funding for school-based mental health programs, which DeVos's budget originally cut. So clearly, DeVos means to deconstruct the very office she is meant to run by eliminating departments and programs at the expense of students. Personally, I depend on Pell Grants to fund my education, and if those were capped at a certain amount, I would really have to reconsider how much my education is worth to me. While she was not successful in getting her budget passed, she's still trying to achieve her goals. And with her limited experience, if things succeed, she will be risking the educations of many. So in conclusion, Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos will be ineffective at serving the students that rely upon her and her department, because what she has done so far shows us that she has no interest in helping. Instead, she is interested in removing protections that help students when schools defraud them, and she wants to render the Department of Education ineffective. Therefore, if Secretary DeVos is successful and her goals are then accomplished, students, schools, and education as a whole will suffer. Thank you.
All right, the background information that you have at the beginning to identify the subject area is fine. It does kind of create a little bit of interest in the subject. Your proposition is identified. I do think it's a little complicated because it seems to focus on, like I think I mentioned to you, the secretary rather than the programs, but I thought that you did a pretty good job putting those things together and trying to resolve that issue. There's a pretty good preview of what the secondary points are going to be, and it's easy to follow. We just have the 2 points that you're dealing with. The first point needs to demonstrate a little bit more the fact that there is a harm to the students. The notion that the students are defrauded assumes that there is, that they didn't get the jobs, they didn't get the education, which I believe might very well be something that can be documented. I'm just looking for more of that documentation there. The decision of the Obama administration to go after that seems like there was probably some data that justified that conclusion back in 2014 when they did that. And so I think you probably want to make a reference to some of that data. It probably would also help if you had a couple of examples here to show what you're talking about. The decision that the secretary has made seems to not suggest that they can't get some of it waived, but the dispute appears to be whether or not they get all of the debt waived. And I'm not exactly sure what the lender's position on this is. The lenders and the schools are not the same group, and so the lenders are probably the ones that are squawking the schools. It sounds like they put the schools out of business. So the lenders are the ones who are out the cash, and the student is not gotten the education that they want, and the school is already gone. So there comes this question about what is the appropriate thing to do, and now we're getting close to a value judgment, and I see the position that you're taking, but I think you'd have an easier argument if you could show, like I said, the tangible harms to those students. Not just that they have loans, but they haven't been able to get the jobs. And I think that there must be evidence from the Obama administration that shows that. That's why they got rid of it in the first place. So I think you need a little bit more of that in that first point. The second point, dismantling the education system. I think I've heard a number of people argue over the years that we ought to get rid of the Department of Education. You need to show that the Department of Education does something that helps students. The only thing that you cite in particular are the Pell Grants, and I don't know that the Department of Education is entirely responsible for those. It may in fact be the case, in which case then your argument would be, if we lose the Pell Grants, which has been proposed, here's how many students are going to be affected. And you've got one example, that's yourself, that illustrates that particular point, and that's not a bad way to get started. In fact, I think it gets a lot of ethos for your presentation, but there's got to be some more information about how dependent students are on these Pell Grants and what the loss of, what was it, half of them that was being proposed, what that would mean to students and their decision to stay in school. I think that's the strongest part of that argument there. The other stuff about cutting other kinds of programs, like the mental health programs, is there data that shows that those mental health programs are being effective, and that if they close, therefore they're going to lose something? There's a presupposition that because you spent the money, you're getting your value for that, and I think that that's not necessarily demonstrated, and you need to do a little bit more of that. Like I said, the closest you came on that one was the Pell Grants, which I think is your best argument on that point. So I think you've got a good argument on the first point. You just need to quantify it, and on the second point, you have a good example, but some generalizations on the quantification would be good. The financial one, that's another one of those things where there's probably more information that can be developed about the number of programs that are cut, and that those programs are pretty effective. That's the stuff that would make this a lot more saleable. But I think that your position was summarized nicely at the end of the speech, although it did seem like you repeated the claim twice at the end instead of just the one time. That seemed a little redundant. Okay, thank you.